So as you can see, Bela Twine Studios went on location, and that was filmed yesterday at Vignoble Côte de Vaudreuil, so not very far away. A beautiful morning, and thanks to them for the opportunity. Please pray with me. Gracious One, give us ears to listen to your Son. Give us ears to listen to those who cry out, "It's just not fair." And help us to see how we can respond with gospel to the teaching from this tale. Amen. It's just not fair. What parent has not heard that cry of outrage when the older sibling is expected to share her stuff with that kid brother who wrecks everything? It's just not fair. It isn't. I was telling Norman I was mildly horrified to hear myself on the lips of my daughter the other day when she told her outraged 3-year-old after he bawled, "It's not fair," at some perceived injustice, and she bluntly replied, not budging from her parental position, "Life isn't fair." And I thought my kids never listened. But seriously, it isn't, is it? Life as we live it isn't fair, no matter how much we want it to be. Good folk get sick. Disasters strike one on top of another. People of questionable talent and morals get jobs in boardrooms and governments. It's just not fair. It's just not fair that women are still paid 73 cents on the dollar that is paid to a male co-worker. It's just not fair that businesses downsize and then rehire their people on short-term contracts with no benefits. It's just not fair that semester by semester adjunct faculty with no tenure tackle the brunt of university teaching. It's just not fair is a righteous complaint of migrant workers who are quarantined in converted pig pens so that they can bring in the harvest for others, us, in the middle of a pandemic. It's just not fair that essential workers are not paid like CEOs of transnational corporations. It's just not fair that children are forced to beg on the streets in Senegal, or forced to mine the elements that fuel our car batteries and our phones. And it's just not fair that children are trafficked for sex from Indonesia to Indianapolis and to Rue Saint-Laurent. It's just not fair the wait staff are expected to make up their below minimum wage with tips. It's just not fair that asylum seekers are suddenly hire worthy at CHSLDs, but not worthy of faster processing of their refugee claims. And it's just not fair that Indigenous women and girls count for less than white women in healthcare and in police efforts to find them or their killers. It's just not fair that workers and producers in developing countries have such limited access to fair trade purchasing policies that they must sell product and labor at unlivably low prices. And it's just not fair that this blessed pandemic causes families not to be able to visit the sick or bury their dead, and that we can't gather in person in our church buildings for a song fest and a hug fest of public worship together. God knows it's just not fair. So much of life this side of heaven isn't fair. And I think that's why Jesus sat Peter and co down and sits us down on our couches and tells us this parable, this tale that won't stop wagging, this seed thought that nestles and settles into the dark soil and soul of our spiritual imagination with this curlicue shoot that looks like a question mark. But what if? As Jesus spins this God dream out of their lived experience in the military, agrarian, often oppressive, commodified economy of Rome, where the day labourer, the day labourer was like the single-use plastic of their day, treated as useful for a moment and then discarded. So as Jesus tells this tale, and it's almost childlike, isn't it, in its rhythms and repetitions and its pantomime predictability that moves parabolically and inevitably to this outrageous conclusion that the last are paid as much as the first. Jesus plants this what if. And he does it with this inflection of a well-placed comma. Norman, can you just show it on the screen? That turns the outraged wail of the self-deserving, "It's just not fair," into this world-inverting insight that in the economy of the gospel, it's just, not merely fair. You can come back to me now. Now, while so many interpreters of this text have actually stepped aside from the very earthbound possibilities of this parable, they spiritualize it or allegorize it into some tale about Jews and then the Johnny-come-lately Christians who get just as much of salvation as those who've worked for it for millennia. Or they say it's about who gets to heaven and how. Now, granted, those are all valid interpretations, but I don't quite buy them. Because this is a parable of the dream of God. And it reaches way back millennia into the poetic imagination of the prophets. And those prophets schooled the Rabbi Jesus, who now schools us, saying, you know this dream of God, of a life, a world on earth as in heaven, where one sheep, one child, one black life, one indigenous life, one snail, one spider, one star, one nucleus of one atom matters enough to God that it is sought and found and cherished and given whatever it needs to be. This dream of God is the dream of God that Mary sang about, where the mighty who are in love with their mightiness will be toppled from their thrones by the weight of their own hubris. That's just, not fair. This dream of God where justice on earth as in heaven is focused like a laser beam on the care of those who are least able to care for themselves, which in biblical terms has always been the child, the orphan, the foreigner, the refugee, the woman, the widow, the cripple, the sick. And that is just, not merely fair. So surely then, this parable that comes along in the wake of all of this is about a gospel arithmetic, a gospel economics, where those who have enough to hire labourers go not once, but repeatedly to the market square, and there they hire and pay everyone a basic livable wage. Oh, what if? It's a gospel arithmetic, a gospel economics where every worker is paid enough to have shelter and a home and food and the capacity to provide for their family. And that is just, not merely fair. Now we might say that these parables of the dream of God are that, they're dreams. But like dreams, think about it, they are both real and impossible. They are both huge and tiny. They're in your face and invisible. They're never and not yet and also now. They're so simple and yet so demanding. They are so clear and yet elusive. And they are about a holy justice that envelops everything in the abundance of God's grace and God's love. And a parable is never simple enough to hear once and let it go. They should leave us lingering long over what gospel action we are being called to when we rise from this hour of worship. What if? What if, in the thick of this pandemic, with all of its losses and uncertainties and its unravelings and revealings of what is both good and terrible about humanity, what if this dream of God for every worker to be paid enough to live and provide, this dream of God for the rich to be generous and just, could actually happen? What if we figured out that a lot of us watching this, if we were to lose some privilege, if we were to engage in sharing our abundance, following through on Jesus' gospel economics, it will leave us not poorer, but richer. Richer in so many ways, in spirit, gratitude, in a sense of abundant life, and so much more, because we will have figured out that it is just, it is right, it is holy, and it is good. What if? What if